Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Near Memo with me, Greg Sterling, and Mike Blumenthal, the lovely and talented Mike Blumenthal. I'm always going to introduce you that way from now on. And today we're very fortunate to be joined by Goetz Weber, who is a mapping expert. He's been in search. He's currently working in enterprise search and communications and logistics. He was at TomTom and here and at Samsung in their mobile division. And so he's got a very robust and deep background in mapping and contextual search and that sort of thing. And we wanted to talk to him today about the future of maps. He has a very strong vision of where mapping needs to go and its current deficiencies. We want to explore that and sort of get into where he thinks things need to go in this new kind of generative AI era and what's possible and who's in a position to do it. So welcome, Guts, for joining us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And do you want to say anything else about what you're working on currently or your background so people can kind of get a little more context?
Grew up at SAP in the engineering division. I'm a theoretical physicist by training.
You were a prodigy and literally grew up in that division.
Well, in a way, I grew up in engineering at SAP after doing my doctoral in theoretical physics and then spent a decade in digital media with two startups. One was a iTunes for Android, which was a fantastic experience. And the other one was a digital media brokerage service for film rights, which was also a fantastic experience. And then went to Samsung to do mobile software strategy in the 2012s. Then spent a decade in mapping with here, and then once with TomTom, mostly on the commercial side, but always intersecting technology, both on the map data side and the services side. And left TomTom about 8 months ago to do two companies that I'm very passionate about. One is a communications brokerage service that allows fleet operators to communicate with drivers. That's called Fleet Chat. That's my own little baby. And then the other one is an enterprise search company that is basically ChatGPT brought to the enterprise using the permissioning systems of the enterprise, which I'm also very fascinated by. So a combination of geospatial data, software services, B2B and B2C.
Excellent.
Not string theory, though, or whatever your PhD was in.
I did do string theory.
You're lucky you switched. Is looking back at 30 years of string theory and seeing how it's gone nowhere, you're lucky you've switched.
Well, it's a fascinating topic, which we won't be talking about today because it's more complicated than I'm able to respond to. But let's talk about the state of mapping. So you had a very provocative LinkedIn post, and you have a companion article that kind of talks about the deficiencies of the current mapping situation. You know, maps have solved certain kinds of problems, which you identify, but there's a lot more that they could be doing that they aren't doing. So why don't you unpack that a little bit and tell us what your thoughts are about those topics?
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Having a bit of distance from the mapping business right now, I come across I found two really important elements. Number one, maps are prevalent. Billions of people use them. They're very expensive to build because you have to build the map data and then serve the map data and the services around them. But there are two key ingredients that I thought were worth discussing. Number one, they're very difficult to monetize. So nobody's really built a very successful business around them. We're talking about the consumer element, right? Not the map
Right.
data production for the
Yes.
automotive industry. That's a very different business. I'm talking about the
Right.
consumer experience. So both Google and Apple have spending tremendous amounts of money building the map data services and also the map data. The end user, they cannot monetize the end user, right? And the experience, and this is really what I realized was the experience is the same for all of us. So both you and I, when we look at a map, we get the same thing. And so there's something oblique in the industry here, which is they're spending a lot of money, which is great. They're building a service, and yet the consumer gets exactly the same experience no matter who they are. And I believe that's a problem, right? And that's something I wanted to start solving for. Because maps are key. They're visual experiences, just like paintings, right? Look at the paintings behind me. The visual experiences, they help us navigate the world through space and time. They're key. They've been around for a long time. It must be 5,000 years old by now in terms of the history of mapping. But these technology giants, right, provide us with exactly the same experience. There's something missing. And as I was unpeeling in my article, the role of the map changes for every individual. In some cases, it's a very lightweight experience. Get me to the hospital, right? I don't want any distractions. I got to get there right now. Get me the optimized route to the hospital, to the front door, or to the emergency room of the hospital, right? There's no advertising there. There's no POIs there. It's a need. Or I'm planning a trip through Yosemite. Show me the most beautiful views. So the user approaches a map, the traditional map now, we can talk about next generation mapping, with very different context and intent. And that is not reflected in the mapping experience today. And I think that's a massive opportunity. So if we look at the mapping business macroscopically, what's been solved is, well, people have built the map data. So you can argue that the road network has been solved for. You can argue that routing has been solved for, and companies do it better here or there. But what hasn't been solved for is the end user's intent. And if you look at the evolution of experiences and look at ChatGPT right now, the elegance of the design, right, and the power of the result is something that's not reflected yet in the mapping world. And I think that's a huge experience. And that's where we get into embeddings, that's where we get into object models, right? Then we get into intent models. And that is, frankly, in my opinion, an open opportunity.
So, I mean, the logical next step would be some marriage of the mapping infrastructure with an LLM or a chat experience on top of that. Is that what you envision, or do you envision something different as a next generation experience?
No, you're right. Look, the current mapping stack is a three-tier architecture. Basically, you have the map data, which is costly and expensive to build, and we have all kinds of vehicles scanning and collecting data, right? So you have the map data, and then you have a services layer that could be a routing service, it could be a geocoding service, or it could be a map tile rendering service, right? And then you have the user experience. So it's a classic three-tier architecture. Nowhere in this architecture is the user's intent captured, right? And nowhere, and this was also discussed by you, Greg, nowhere are there agents that support my intent. So this three-tier architecture needs to be extended a bit. And the first opportunity is to bake in the user's intent. And in order to understand the user's intent, we need to understand how the user moves through time and space, because we move through time and space with an intent. We don't do a random walk. So when you go to the store or when you go to drive to a meeting, right, there's an implicit intent. We need to understand an intent model and motion model. So for this intent, I do this kind of motion in general. And that is where the LLMs come in over time.
Define motion.
Motion is maps are systems that help us navigate space and time. And in order to navigate space and time, we have road networks or we have paths, right? But behind a trajectory is an intent, and that needs to be captured. So for a given intent, there's a given route, and an abstract way, right? And that needs to be modeled into the object models.
You mentioned a number of intents in one of your articles: urgency, routine, exploratory, or social, which I thought were a good capturing of just sort of the high level intents. But you're saying these need to be layered sort of on top of the bottom two layers, but before the visual layer. Is that so? Sort of stuck in there as a fourth conceptual layer to this project?
Correct. Absolutely correct. If you need to go to the hospital, right? That's an intent. And that has an urgency and it has a meaning, right? And there's a desire and there's a routing element to it. The result of that intent is a path to get to the hospital, right? And that should be a sparse UI. It shouldn't be a dense UI with showing me landmarks and POIs and maybe safeways and so forth.
And you did a nice short post with a visual example of that at LinkedIn that I will share in the show notes for people to see what that might look like, where you stripped everything out of the map, all POIs, all visuals, all road indicators, just highlighted the shortest route between you and the emergency.
That's right. And the opposite one is I'm in Lisbon or in Madeira, and I don't know Madeira very well, right? But I have time. So please help me navigate through Madeira and show me the most important things consistent with the person that I am. And I'm interested in art galleries, and Mike, you're interested in other things, right? And so that navigation through space and time, taking into account the user's not preferences, but profile and intent, needs to be reflected in a map.
If it's Madeira, I think I'm interested in the alcohol.
In the Madeira.
In the Madeira, yes.
Before this leaves my brain, let me ask a couple of things or make a couple of comments. So historically, the intent is captured by the query. That's the vehicle for the conveyance of the intent. And the way that Google has conditioned us to search is very truncated queries, right? It's hospital near me or Madeira near me, whatever it is. And so you can infer from the fact of a hospital that there is some urgency. There's certain kinds of inferences that could be drawn at least by certain destinations, not all of them. If I'm looking for a restaurant, that's more vague than hospital. And so there's some inferences that can be drawn from the query, and the query has been the tool that Google has had or Apple has had or Microsoft has had to infer intent. With ChatGPT or something like ChatGPT, an LLM, a chat experience, the explicit expression of intent is much more elaborate because of the way that the conversational interface works. So I could say, I'm interested in, I'm in Madeira and I want to find these things and show me all these kinds of things. And I'm a person who likes museums and I like cafes and so on and so forth. And because of the context window and memory, you get inherent personalization in that experience.
That's right.
Right. So you've got a chasm between the very truncated intent signals that you get in a current mapping or search user interface. I mean, Google's trying to change that with all its AI integration, and the very elaborate conversational explicit intent that you can get from an LLM. That was just kind of a comment rather than a question.
I think you're onto something there. Historically, the mapping services have solved for the routing problem. Get me from A to B. And in some way, it's a context-less problem statement, which is, I need to go from A to B, show me a route on the map. And that's been solved across all the mapping providers. Right? But navigating space and time is a very different animal because it involves many dimensions. One dimension is if I'm in my local environment, I probably don't need a map. So why overload me with information? But if I need to get to, let's say, an art gallery down here in Mission Bay and so forth, right? I need a very simple route. Don't overload me with information because it is my neighborhood. However, and going back to your contextual discussion, if I'm navigating Madeira, that is a conversation. Right? It's not just a route. And I think that's where mapping services have a tremendous opportunity because they're so engaging. And they're engaging because they're visual experiences, because the human being is a visual animal, shall we say.
Well, you can. Two thoughts. One is that I'm starting to see full knowledge prompting, at least on my Apple with Apple Maps, where they're just bringing up a little notice that you normally commute at this time, you might consider this route. I'm starting to see some of that full knowledge prompting occurring. The other is, though, there's the problem that you mentioned earlier, which is the lack of monetization. Google feels compelled to monetize and thus show ads on the map more and more, i.e. the sort of enshittification process that seems to so frequently happen because these, as I think it was Horace Dito pointed out, cost somewhere in the order of $2 billion a year just to keep them running.
That's right.
And so there's this pressure on the other side. So one, we're starting to see some acknowledgement of motion through space, at least very limited. And there's also this pressure to sort of not just show you the simple
in Google's
interface,
case.
Right. Oh, you're passing by a Tim Hortons, you better stop.
Right.
In Google's case.
That's right.
One addition to that. So you can draw inferences from a binary kind of context, which is home or near my home. And the map knows that because you visit that place frequently. You navigate to and from a place, which can be identified. And sometimes you give that explicit information to the map. So there's home and near my home. And as you say, your neighborhood is familiar to you. And then you've got away, which can be anything. And there can be degrees of away, right? So one inference could be that within certain number of degrees or certain distance from my home, I'm going to have higher knowledge, greater knowledge. And when I'm farther away after a certain threshold, I will have less or no knowledge. And so you could draw certain kinds of contextual inferences from that default information, I would think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now couple that with intent, right? So even in the hyperlocal environment, which is a mile or two around my dwelling, right? I don't need a lot of information. The moment I move
rurally, it's 10 miles around your dwelling.
Yes, and that could be
those could be defaults, and those could be defaults, right?
And going beyond that, the map complexity and the data complexity increases. Now, Mike, you mentioned Apple. So Apple has an unfair competitive advantage. They know a lot about you, right? And they have
on phone unfortunate.
phone, right? And the phone is with us all the time, and so they have an unfair advantage, and so does Google in that sense. So the contextualization, let's leave and maybe call it personalization, although that is a different animal, is absolutely possible from an Apple's perspective. They know who you are, they know where you go, they know what you spend, and so forth, right? So their ability to customize the canvas, this very, very complicated canvas, right, is absolutely there. They even have your calendar.
Right.
So now we're looking at, and this goes back to Greg, the questions you asked. What what we're looking at is motion to space, which is tactically called routing. Then we have memory, and then we have intent. So very complicated dimension. So memory is the kind of person I am, the kind of habits, my habitual experiences, but also what I use this canvas for. Is it for routing? Is it for discovery? Is it for deep search? So that's memory. And then we have the world of routing, which is getting from A to B, and then contextualization, which is the actual intent I use this canvas for. And today's mapping experiences, I think, are linear. They all do the same thing. You look at all the providers, they all look the same.
So to the point about Apple knowing a lot of information about you, they could profile you and create a default profile. I mean, this is what was going on with a lot of the location profiling that was happening by mobile companies
Yes.
that got everybody into hot water, was all this sort of bucketing of people based on their movements through space. You can infer, the cookie for the real world was one of the terms that was used. So by moving through space to museums and to certain categories of restaurants, Indian food, certain kinds of behaviors that are trackable over time, you could be profiled, and that could be used for default personalization. And then to Mike's example about the prompt that Apple is delivering to him, we see you're in Lisbon. Are you interested in uh, pastiche or whatever it is? You could combine profiles with explicit, kind of queries or prompts that get you to respond.
But remember
I mean, I
the
don't want, yeah, go ahead.
profiles, the data sets that were generated based on users' trajectory, right? They were often not for the user. They were monetized
No,
out.
they were for advertisers,
That's
of
right, right?
course.
So
Yeah.
they weren't there for the user's benefit, right? It didn't create an enriched experience for the user. Maybe there was an indication that there's an Indian restaurant that Mike likes if he's in LA and so forth, right? But those were sort of derivative data sets that were monetized based so against the user's intent. What I'm suggesting is do the opposite, build a better experience, because we have this unusual data set that maps are highly heavily used. We have the usage data, but they're not customized or personalized to the end user. And I think that remains a great opportunity. There's another
What?
element, Mhm,
Yes. Go ahead, please.
which is maps are social,
In
right?
what way? Could you expound on that a little bit?
So we roam through time and space, not to be alone, but to be with other people. We go to meetings, we go to professional meetings, maybe virtual like this one, but sometimes in person, and hopefully increasingly so. We socialize with friends at restaurants, we have outings with friends, we go on hikes, we have birthday parties and so forth, right? And the mapping experience lacks several elements in my opinion. Number one, it needs to bind people together. So there is an element of social communication on a map. We are going to meet next week, Wednesday, at this place in Los Angeles, right? The three of us, right? So we're sharing context, we have an intent in space and time, and we have a communication around that, because Mike is always 15 minutes late, and Greg, you're always 15 minutes early, and I'm, somewhere in the middle. So maps, communication, and memory, right? That's completely lacking, right? If we want to meet in space and time, we have to use different applications, right? We have email, we have text messaging, we have all kinds of things, right? But the intent, again, is to meet in space and time. So why doesn't a mapping system reflect that?
Well, so there's two responses or three to that. One is Snap Map. Snap, the
Yes.
social network, has a shared map which you
Yes.
can expose your position on, and people, typically younger people, use it and they identify where their friends are. And then Apple's, of course, Find My, so you can
Yes.
monitor the location of your family or friends who have given you permission to
And you
watch
can
them.
monitor it through iMessage. So there is sort of this backwards integration into iMessage. If you click on the user in a message, you can see where they are. So
That's right.
And I think my memory is not what it once was, but I think there have been in the past startups that have tried to use a mapping interface and layer and create a social layer on top of that and do things. I mean, there was some, I don't remember who did this, but there was some communication platform that was trying to take a transcript. This might have been Microsoft. It was trying to take a transcript of a conversation and then make suggestions, sort of real-time suggestions with tools embedded in the chat. My vague memory is that Microsoft was trying to do some sort of UI. So you could have a group chat and people could say, we're going to Lisbon and we want to, let's figure out where we're going to go and where we're going to stay. And then in real time, you were getting kind of suggestions and options in some sort of window. But the broader point is that I think different startups have tried to do a version of social mapping unsuccessfully to
Noted.
date.
And I think Snapchat is way ahead of the curve with their social, and it's with a social map design, but it's also a user adoption phenomenon, right? There's a certain user group that gravitates towards this kind of data sharing. I'm not suggesting one does broad data sharing. What I'm suggesting is one reinvents the mapping experience, brings in context, right? Memory, and brings in a conversational element that doesn't exist today.
So who's in a position to do this today among the different players that exist? I mean, we didn't talk about Microsoft, but Microsoft has Bing, here is still doing mapping. It's owned by the German Auto Consortium. You've got, I mean, I don't know what TomTom still exists. Obviously, you were just there. So we've got Google, we've got Microsoft, we've got Apple, and we've got some of the infrastructure providers. And there's the Overture Maps Foundation, the open source project. You've got Facebook that tried to buy Waze, or Meta now that tried to buy Waze unsuccessfully. So you have some deep pockets and you have some existing players. Who is more likely to do this? And if nobody's likely to do this, how could a startup do this?
Good question. In summary, we have the map data producers, right? So that's here, that's Google, that's TomTom. They produce map data of varying qualities, standard definition, high definition for navigation and so forth. But at the root, all of them produce a map data set that's used for navigation, which is broadly routing. So here is a routing company, TomTom is a routing company, and so is Google and Apple, right? So the question is, who can go beyond that? And I believe that companies that have a user-centric approach will be the ones to innovate. So I would put most certainly Meta in that category, and most certainly Snapchat or Snap. These are user-centric companies. We do know that maps create a lot of engagement with the end user, and they're used daily, billions of users per month. So these are user-centric. There are companies that are user-centric by design that understand that maps are heavily used. The use case right now is routing overwhelmingly and local discovery. So show me, identify a POI. So I think those are the kinds of companies that come from a user-centric approach versus a map data-centric approach. I think TomTom here and even Google in that category have solved for routing and navigation, but they haven't solved for the overarching user context.
Where does Apple fit in this binary view, consumer versus data?
Like as we mentioned, I think Apple has an unfair advantage of being highly vertically integrated, which means
But focused on the consumer, in other words.
yes.
So they are in that. So they are highly vertically integrated. They do control, as does Google. But do you think that this new mapping paradigm would evolve off our current hardware? Do you think it's going to take Meta to build glasses or Apple to build glasses to see this more user-focused experience in mapping or
I don't
some other interface?
look. I think companies, they're smaller companies. It doesn't have to be an Apple to solve for this problem statement. I recently had a discussion with Sean Fanning, who's doing a little company in New York that brings together social experiences and mapping to solve for a simple problem, which is I'm in New York. I don't know anybody. I'd like to meet somebody like that. So it's location, it's social networking, social graph, right? What I'm saying is that the map data problem has been solved. The data products are available, right? So you don't have to rebuild the data products. You don't have to
So you
rescan
can
them.
license them, in other words. You can
You can
license
buy
them.
the data, license the data, right? Or license the services. And that's what most certainly Snapchat is doing, right? And that's what other companies are doing as well. Many ingredients have been solved for. What hasn't been solved for is a reimagination of the user experience. And that's often done by an entrepreneur. It doesn't have to be an app.
Although for them to succeed, there's these barriers and advantages that Apple and Google both have by controlling both the mapping information and the hardware, vertically integrated hardware, to lesser greater extent.
But both Apple and Google,
The entrepreneur still needs to make money in that context, right?
but both Apple
If
and
you're
Google,
paying, if you're paying Apple or Google for the API, it becomes very difficult to make any significant progress and scale simultaneously.
well, both Apple and Google have a store, so you can always get to the end user, right? So there's no lockout in that sense. Both Apple and Google and here on TomTom and so forth have APIs which are licensable. What needs to be thought through is a new mapping experience, or a new navigation experience, or a contextual exploration experience, right? And that's what my article was going for.
Well, so you were the business model that came up at the beginning, the lack of monetization, which is not exactly the same thing, but overlapping. The business model is a fundamental problem. And then the go to market is also a challenge, I think. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're licensing underlying map data or routing data or whatever, so you have a certain amount of money that you have to pay, and then you're going to have to obviously make money on top of that to survive. So you've got really very few choices. You've got a donation model. Please give us money. That's Mozilla. You've got an advertising model, or you've got a subscription model. And if you won't, and if you, because of the availability of free mapping, that's pretty good, the barrier to subscriptions is quite high. So you have to provide some really differentiated experience or unique experience there. So that's a fundamental challenge, it seems to me. And then the go-to-market problem is by take a demographic approach, meaning I'm going after young people who like certain kinds of things in common, or I'm going after older people who lack specialized services or whatever, or I'm going after a specific use case or an industry, right? So there's how do you enter the market and how do you support yourself over time? And then there's a third problem, which you don't have to answer right now, which is user demand. I mean, the assumption of this conversation is that there would be demand for a next generation or improved experience that takes intent into account and context into account. But how do we know that for sure? I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem because it doesn't exist, so we don't know if there's demand for it. But what gives you confidence that there would be demand? You can take any of those in any order that you like. I've loaded up a lot of things there for you to address.
Thank you very much. You've just provided me with a Rubik's Cube of questions.
Yes, well, you can solve for
And you
one
have
or two or
37
all three.
seconds to solve it.
Yeah.
Let's go back to this hospital example, right? Where the user's intent, there's a requirement, there's a user intent, and there's a desire to get from A to B really quickly, right? Is that monetizable? So number one, is that intent real? Absolutely. All of us have to go somewhere urgently at some point in time, right? Is it monetizable? I'm not sure. Right? So the intent is real. Is it monetizable? Probably not. Is solving it valuable? Absolutely. To get to the front door of the hospital is an absolutely must-have use case, right? So and I argue that that is a sparse map. So it's very, very bare bones, little route going from A to B. Is navigation in my home environment, is that important? Well, if I need to go to the art gallery, what's the quickest way to get there? It's a routing problem that can be solved. Is it monetizable? Because I already, in my hyperlocal context, I already have all the information I need. I know the roads, I know the streets, I know the paths, right? It's unlikely that Google can insert an ad there and say, Goetz, deflect from this trajectory and I'll pay, I'll give you a discount to go to the pizzeria that you normally don't go to. But if I'm navigating an area that I don't know, so I'm going to go to Sausalito tomorrow to visit a friend, and I don't know Sausalito that well. So there's a bit of an exploration use case, right? I have time. There's not that much urgency, but I have time to explore, and I can be deviated from a route that I would normally take. So the exploration use case, I think, is the monetizable one. The one that's not monetizable is the hyperlocal one, which is I just need to get to the art gallery quickly, or the cinema because I'm late, right? My wife's waiting for me, so to get me there quickly, I can't remember how to go there. So as the user approaches the system, they have different contexts, right? And they have different urgencies and they have different ambiguities. The lower the ambiguity, the lower the monetization opportunity, in my opinion. The higher the ambiguity, the higher the monetization opportunity.
In your experience, what percentage of usage falls into those two categories?
Good question, right? So the commuting, let's go. The daily commuting situation is give me the shortest route to get to work. Right? That is a valuable service, and that route changes because of traffic conditions, because of road construction, and so forth. Right? I'm not going to be deviated and stop at a Starbucks if I have to go to work. I mean, come on.
Well, quick interruption. Waze has tried to monetize that use case.
And the result was?
Well, I mean, there have been some case studies showing you coupons or offers or new products for restaurants or other businesses along the map, and it's mostly been sort of fast food or fast casual.
Mhm.
And what they're monetizing for is subsequent visits, right? You're not going to deviate from your commute in the moment, but you will be aware that this exists. And so at some later point, you may do that. I think the results have been okay, but I don't hear anything more about it. So, you can infer not great from that, perhaps.
And we could put that in a category of brand building.
Yes.
It's sort of the selective memory building, which is, oh, there's a store of this kind along the route. But going back, the user's intent is to get from A to B, right? And that intent needs to be solved for by a routing system, and that's been done, right? And I argue that should be a sparse environment, a sparse UI. It shouldn't be overloading the user with context that is absolutely irrelevant. I don't need to see the landmarks unless they're navigation relevant. Right? At the moment we increase the user's ambiguity, which is I'm not in my local environment. Back to Mike's point, right? The phone knows that I'm not in my local environment. That's when the information density goes up, and that's where the opportunities go up. And so we have to triage the user experience, the user's memory, who he or she is, and their intent. Is the intent highly ambiguous? Is it not ambiguous? And therein lies the opportunity, Mike.
And again, you have knowledge of these systems. What percentage, like for me personally, most of my use is point to point routing. I do have some collaborative motion. I meet up with my family once a month, whatever. I do some exploratory, go travel 2, 3, 4 times a year. But in a percentage basis, in other words, income opportunity basis, it's 10% of the routine journeys get allocated to those other uses. Roughly, I would say. I don't know what the percentage is. Can you share that breakdown? And how big is that opportunity, I guess, for exploratory
I
or
suspect that
shared use
you're right
cases?
about that. I suspect it's between 10 and 20%. So,
Then
but
you
that
need then you need massive usage, right? If you have an audience of millions and millions of people, then
yes,
that becomes a meaningful opportunity, even at 10% of usage.
absolutely. And the other side, Mike, is we can scale down. Like the map rendering can be scaled down for these use cases where you don't need a lot of information. If you're in the hyperlocal environment, you don't need the full context of the map. It is very expensive payload to deliver. We can absolutely create a minimal canvas for the hyperlocal experience and then a very, very complicated canvas for the exploratory use
And
case.
the exploratory and collaborative experiences, as you pointed out, have not been well developed. So the attempt to monetize routine journeys is a waste of everybody's time and money, right? I mean, it's just annoying to users and couldn't, in the case of Waze or Google, I don't think generates a whole lot.
And it's opposite to the user's intent, right? We're not reflecting the user's intent is to get to A to B, not to be deflected from it.
So
So
let's
I have one quick question though. Do you
sure.
think if Google or Apple or whoever integrates the exploratory use cases in a more dynamic way and the collaborative motion and social aspects in a more collaborative way, do you think it would go from 10% to 40% of utilization? Or do you think utilization would go up and it would mostly be these new types of utilization and thus the monetization would there'd be more opportunity there?
Look, we haven't the mapping experience right now is solitary. If we include a social experience, which is the meetup, let's do the meetup situation, right? We're meeting up at a venue. We both know where it is. we both know that we want to be there at 3 p.m. and, Mike is always 15 minutes late and I'm always 15 minutes earlier, right? There's a communication element to mapping that doesn't exist today. Integrating a communication element in mapping would increase the usage and the engagement, right? And if you have user engagement, you have monetization opportunities. There might be.
Although in that particular one, it seems like monetization would be more limited than in the exploratory use case, because I'm communicating to my daughter-in-law. I don't really want to be pitched. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. But Mike, you have to park your car.
Right.
You have
That's
to
true.
park. So we're meeting up on Haight Street in San Francisco, right? And you have to park your car. Now that's not a trivial place to find a parking spot. So there's a garage there, right? So the context is the meeting, right? The meeting has a place. The place has a context, which is downtown San Francisco. We know you're in a car, right? The car needs to be parked in time. Yeah. So there's an inference that happens there around context. The meeting itself.
There's a contextual advertising opportunity there based on a knowledge graph of associations. If people who are in this place, they tend to do these things. Here are the vendors that, they might be interested in or whatever.
Right.
And there's an open spot on level 4, row 5, and it's right next to where your person you're meeting just parked.
And by the time you get there, it'll be gone.
Unless
well,
you pay.
I suppose you could do that, right? But that requires another third-party integration. Let's talk about how you go to market with this. Let's assume it sounds like you're most bullish on the social use case. Is that fair, as opposed to some industry-specific thing or very other specialized? I mean, how would you go to market if you're building this? What's your entry point?
I think the social experience and the communication. The social experience and the communication element is highly valuable and important. Human beings are visual. That's why we gravitate towards map, because they help us understand the world that's beyond our horizon. If I look out the window, maps are not used if you have a visual experience, a direct visual experience. You need a map to navigate beyond the visual experience. Now, human beings need to communicate, and we need to integrate those two elements. And I think the social experience, combining the social graph with the spatial graph, is an opportunity.
And so that argues in favor of somebody like Meta or Snap, I suppose, doing something like this. Or even
I would
TikTok,
contend that the real social graph is a much smaller graph. It's the business graph that you interact. It's the business partners you interact with. It's the family you interact with. And most of that stuff has shifted out of Meta's view. Maybe it's in WhatsApp or something. But it isn't the big graph you need for this. It's the little graph. It's the personal graph, whether business or professional or medical or whatever it is. So it's not quite Meta. Again, it might be WhatsApp, but it isn't Facebook.
It's probably your phone book to some degree.
Right? Yes, that's right.
It's your phone book to some degree. And then there's like pushing the phone book up to a second degree, which is, I'm in New York. I have 2 hours. I'd like to meet somebody like that. Is there somebody like that around me? So we have space, we have time, we have context, we have a graph, we have a social graph that extends beyond the phone book. Those are use cases that are being solved.
So let me be devil's advocate right now. There's a lot of, by analogy, there's a lot of work now being done to integrate chat or LLMs into browsers, right? So the Edge browser now, it has Copilot, and Chrome has Gemini, although it's an underwhelming kind of integration. ChatGPT's got a browser that they're going to roll out, and Comet from Perplexity. So everybody's going to have a browser which is AI capable. And I have skepticism about adoption. I mean, they could, everybody's browsers that they're already using could shoehorn in AI, and then you've got immediate adoption. But I'm very skeptical that people are going to switch to something like Comet, because there's a lot of inertia around existing behavior, and the benefits, I mean, it remains to be seen. And certainly this is very early in this process, but the benefits are very limited in people's perception versus their existing comfort and familiarity with Chrome or Safari or whatever they're using, or Firefox, as the case may be.
And this problem is even bigger on the phone. I mean, it's even harder to switch browsers on the phone, or less likely.
Right. So sort of, and I'll give you a chance to answer in a second. So Maps are really good at doing what they do, and there's a lot of information there, and I'm comfortable using them. This incremental value that you're talking about, I mean, you presumably think it's much greater than incremental, but let's just say it's incremental, at least at the start. I have to get something really tangible, like everybody's doing it, or there's so much more value, or the user experience is really exciting and fun and different. For example, people love the user experience of AI. They really love the conversational nature of that. How do you get people to adopt it?
Fair question. So let's go back to the browser discussion you just, or the browser, the browser discussion. These are technology companies with an intent, right? They're trying to. The intent is not to create new value for the user. The intent is to harvest the user's data, and that's why there's the browser strategy. Right? This is not building a new experience for the end user. The new experience was ChatGPT. That was the new experience. Now they're trying to extend to harvest user data, hence the browser strategy, which is a corporate strategy, which is fine. The mapping experiences today are notoriously non-integrated. So they don't really attach to your email. They don't attach to your chats. They don't attach to your calendar, right? But they're absolutely essential in navigating space and time. So we have this dichotomy that they're really highly used applications, and yet they don't fit to the user's intent. The user's intent is to move from A to B, to meet with somebody, to converse with somebody. And that value chain or that guided procedure is not supported by the mapping systems today. And I'm arguing that by integrating context, calendar, communication, the mapping experiences can be diluted in complexity because they're way too complicated for the end user today, right? And create new value. The example is we're meeting tomorrow in The Hague. That is a time and space location, right? There's a context, which is it's a lunch meeting. There's the need around that, which is parking. There's a need around that, which is additional services of some kind, right? That can be catered to in a model where we understand a location, space, time, users' preferences, and users' behavior.
Hypothetically, for sure, I think conceivably it represents a better user experience, and maybe ChatGPT or somebody in ChatGPT's position is the one to build this because of the way in which you interact with an LLM. You know, you're explicitly expressing intent and your needs in a much more direct way that gives them more information, potentially to deliver a better result. With a map, you as a kind of a canvas to display, here's the restaurant, here's the parking, here's the routing. Hypothetically, somebody could do that.
I'm actually probably in agreement with you, which is ChatGPT has captured the conversational element of the user. If they build a data model and an object model that captures space and time and connections between space and time and places, I think they're in the ideal position to solve for this. Absolutely.
Alternatively, it might be Facebook and Apple, WhatsApp and iMessage and whatever, RCS might be a more appropriate environment in which to embed mapping in a more integrated, fluid, social way. Because you already have the social connections there. You already have the interface. It's simple. It's clean. Let's meet next weekend at Burdick's Blueberry Farm. And it knows enough to bring, do you need directions? Or in other words, it knows a lot of context because we just shared that in our group chat. So it could be Facebook or Apple or whoever is controlling the group chat.
So we have only a couple of minutes remaining. I mean, I think this is fascinating material, and we could have gone down many different paths and rabbit holes to further explore things. Let's project ahead a few years. Do you think any of this will be built? What would our conversation be like a few years from now? Is it a social interface? Is it an LLM with a map? Has some brilliant entrepreneur integrated
Are
your
you the
calendar?
CEO of this new
Yes,
company?
right.
Definitely not.
And we're
Definitely.
employees number 1 and 2.
Definitely not. I'm fascinated by a few problems, having worked in this space for a decade now. Routing has been solved, and yet the map canvas is highly engaging. Right? We all gravitate towards it. We use it daily, and navigating through space and time is becoming more complex because of the dynamism of it, right? Roads open and close, and there's traffic, and POI is open and close. I mean, look at the change of velocity of POI closure during COVID, right? So the world is changing rapidly, and the complexity of navigating the world now in an abstract way and discovering the world is increasing, right? And we're not alone, right? So there's a social element, right? It's not just the planning element, but we want to go to Yosemite as a family, right? And my kid wants to do something different, right? I have an adult plan for Yosemite and has a kid plan for Yosemite, right? So we have complexity of the world is going up. The user demands are increasingly complex, and taste is important. So I'm vegetarian, and that needs to be taken into account. And that needs to be reflected in this discovery vehicle called the map. If I don't need to discover something, I don't need a map. And this discovery remember we talked about the hospital, that's not a discovery use case. That is a get me from A to B quickly, a lightweight UI, right? But the discovery use case of my anniversary is coming up. My wife has these interests, like what can we do together? That discovery use case is incredibly valuable, incredibly complex. And that is what I think we should go after.
Will it have been solved in the next 3 to 5 years? Would we have a very different conversation 3 years from now or 5 years from now?
Absolutely, and I think there are a few people working on that right now. And just some recent announcement that I've seen in the venture community in San Francisco. So this is being worked on. So I suspect
All
that
right.
when we speak in 3 to 5 years,
We'll
you'll
have
be
it.
saying we told each other so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Goetz Weber, for this fascinating conversation. I was trying not to mispronounce your name, and we will have you back at some point. I think
Thank you.
it's a very interesting problem, and I do agree there's an opportunity, but the barriers are very great to realizing it, and there'll be some casualties along the way if people are trying to do this. But hopefully, somebody will bring out something quite interesting and new. I mean, Google's innovation of making the map draggable was a
Yes.
profound change in the UI that really enabled Google Maps to take off because it was different. And we need something like that it captures people's imagination to get them excited about some new experience, I think.
Absolutely.
Mike,
Well,
any
thank you both.
final? Yes, absolutely. Any final thoughts?
Just wanted to thank Gather Up for sponsoring us, and hopefully we'll see you next week. We will be sharing some links in the show notes. So if you found this conversation of interest, be sure to check out the links in the show
And if
notes.
people are interested in connecting with you, Guts,
Yes.
where should they do that?
I'm available on LinkedIn.
Okay, terrific. And my apologies for not mentioning our generous sponsor, Gather Up. Thank you, Mike, for doing that. We will see you.